Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Conservation for All. In this series, I take scientific studies on conservation and break them down for the everyday audience. I'll try to translate that technical jargon so it doesn't get in the way. Today, we'll be looking at the extraordinary courtship displays of hummingbirds and how they interact with the senses. Courtship displays are some of the most stimulating and amusing animal behaviors to experience. I would say there are two main types that humans understand: visual and auditory. On the one hand, you have the beautiful plumages of peacocks or the sand designs of pufferfish. On the other side, there are the melodious calls of countless bird species or even frogs. These can vary from species to species, even culminating in both flamboyant feathers and mesmerizing movements. However, it may be that the smallest of them all, the hummingbird, might just have the most complex. Before we move on, let's go over some terms that appear in the paper and define them so we're all on the same page. The first term is orthogonal, which means at a right angle to, or perpendicular, like the lines of a T. The second is nadir. You may be familiar with the zenith or apex of a climb. However, the nadir is the opposite, the lowest point of a dive. And finally, iridescent. These are colors that seem to change from different angles of viewing. I find hummingbirds to be fascinating creatures. They're tiny yet immensely powerful, able to hover and fly backwards. Since they're common, even in urban environments, I think they also have the potential to be a popular flagship species. By the way, a flagship species is a species that many people know and care about, which can serve as a representative for conservation purposes. Think the panda from the World Wildlife Fund. Hummingbirds have both auditory and visual components that we experience all the time. Their small chirps can sometimes be the first indicator that they're nearby, but when you spot them, be sure to look for that colorful patch of feathers on the throat, also known as the gorget. However, Hogan and Stoddard decided to go a step further and look at the courtship dives of the broad-tailed hummingbird. This is when a male hummingbird does an aerial dive over a perched female hummingbird. They had a hummingbird feeder and a willow shrub in which hummingbird sightings were common. Then they set up a GoPro aimed at the shrub and took videos and audio of courtship dives that occurred. In order to plot data and get relatively accurate measurements, only dives which were orthogonal to the camera were included. They were left with 48 dives to analyze. The trajectory of these dives were plotted and show a general U. They also plotted the speed of the birds over time, showing the fastest speed at right before the nadir, represented as 0 on the time axis. These are all relatively expected results. However, they found that apart from the obvious visual component of the dive itself, there are additional components of the sound produced by the feathers of the diving bird and the flash and change of the color of the gorget as the male passes over the female, and it changes from red to black. And that's not all. They are able to break down the audio and realize that at different points during the dive, different feathers, wing or tail, produce different sounds. The sharpest chirp of the tail feather occurs right at the bottom of the dive. The authors also used a model of hummingbird vision to exemplify what the gorget of the male would appear like at various orientations. Interestingly to me, the gorget seemed brightest not when the male is directly overhead, but when the beak is slightly pointed towards the female. When you combine this with the trajectory and audio graphs, it looks like speed, sound, and color all peak at the same time. Hogan and Stoddard estimate this all occurs within 300 milliseconds of one another. While the authors were gathering all this data, they refrained from making too many guesses on how this actually affects mating success. They were unable to determine male identity and therefore could not track it. However, in my mind, I see this as an indicator that animal behavior can be incredibly synchronized, and it makes me worried how human activities might negatively affect them. Thanks for joining me as I break down Hogan and Stoddard's paper on the synchronization of speed, sound, and iridescent color in a hummingbird aerial courtship dive. As usual, I'll list all my sources in the description so you can check it out yourself, which I highly recommend. They have tons of data to sift through. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to answer as best as I can or point you towards someone who can. But before I go, I want to leave you with a question. This paper focuses on showing that there is new data out there ready to be collected. However, it generally leaves the interpretation up to you. In which ways do you think that this data could be applied to inform conservation decisions? Have a good day.